This is Gemara and Moed Katan Daf Gimel. Today's share has been generally sponsored by a close friend of the Daf, L'Zeicher, a Zivug Hagoyin Bekarov, very, very soon to find their proper and appropriate Shidduch, L'Rachel Bas Adina, Mert Hashem, the learning of the entire Chabura as we head forth into a tremendously new Masechta. All the new subscribers, all the new Torah being learned, should all be an incredible schos. The Rachel Bas Adina should find the Shidduch Hagoyin Bekarov Mamish. As well as learning should be a schos for Shlema, for Avram and Orchel Shimshon ben Chana, Abigail Perel Bas Esther Michal Mordechai ben Nacham Miriam Gabriela Bas Bluma Yisrael Yitzchak ben Dina Shmuel Yosef ben Yeved Ben Vega Chaim Ezar Shamzim Reis Ezar Bas Kinali Siyam Chaysa Yisrael Memento Lezer Shalei Shams Damim Shavik Shechan Shmol Ben Tildin Chan Rezum Chai Bas Nina Adin Nebi Shin Reis Rivka Shem Tzim Chlas Avram Yakotar Bas Kila Shem Yisrael ben Esther Yehudis V'Soy Yishar Chali Yisrael. It's finally as well Yitzchos Shidduch Yisrael Chaim Devar Shem Bas Yizgidul Shal Nezu Shan Makol Mordechai V'Savshenda Sigidul Bas Savshenda Shalman Levizava Ofek Ben Tali Shema ben Chaya, with all others that need their shidduch. We're holding on the bottom of Bezim and Bez. We're in the middle of a question. We ended with an incredible idea yesterday, which is, as I'm sure many realize, is incredibly halach lamaisa for those living here in Eretz Yisrael. Yesterday on Bezim and Bez, about 10 lines to the bottom, we had a question. As you can see highlighted, Tanan, Mashkin, Beis HaShlachan, B'Mayidu, B'Shvias, says the Mishnah, you let water this Beis HaShlachan, this field that's on a mountain, the field that needs rainwater, you let water it on Cholamayid and Shemitah. And the Gemara asked, the Cholamayid, I understand, that's the whole idea, and that's going to be the big focus of a lot of this parak, is that Cholamayid, whenever we have a hefsid, we're going to have Tircha that's allowed. Tircha Yasira, we learned to the Mishnah not. But whenever there's a hefsid, going to be a loss, then we're going to be allowed Tircha. But ask the Gemara, why are you allowing Shemitah? Why are you allowing to do Malacha and Shemitah? And the Gemara asked that we brought this back to the Machlekes Rabbah and Rav Yosef, in which we learned a bit higher up in the Amid that there was a fundamental machlekes. Why is it forbidden for menachesh and mashke the zrayim? Is it because of chayrish or zayreya, plowing your planting? But either way, why is that mutter on Shemitah? So we ended yesterday that Rebbe holds very fascinating that Shemitah b'zman hazeh is derabanan, and that's the reason why there's room to be mekel. Says the Gemara today, 2 lines on the bottom of Bezim Beis, Rava Amar afilu tema rabbanan. You could even say the Mishnah is going according to the opinion of the Rabbanan, who hold that Shemitah is manazeh nowadays a din daraisa minatayra. It's a biblical halach. Yet avos aser rachmana. What is forbidden? What is this entity that is aser midaraisa on Shemitah? The avos, the primary malachais. But as we turn over to Gimel Amud Aleph, says the Gemara, Toldais le'aser achmana, but the secondary, the children, the not as primary malachais are not forbidden, and therefore watering is not considered a av malach. It's a tolda. It's a subcategory. It's not the primary work, and that's the reason why it's going to be permitted on Shemitah. And the Gemara now explains, Tichsev, as the Pasuk says, Ubashana Shvius, Shabbos, Shabboson Yel Haaretz, on the 7th year should be a year of Shabbos to the land. And the Pasuk continues, Adchala Yisizra, you should not plant in your field. Now the Gemara learns, Michti, I don't understand. Zemira Bechlal Zeriya. Zemira, pruning, is included in Zeriya, planting. Ubitzira, and picking grapes, is Bechlal Ketzira, is included in cutting down the grain. So why did the Torah have to speak out so verbose and tell us all these different words? As we look at the pasuk for one moment, if you look at the pasuk tells us, "Ubashana Shviyah Shabbos Shabbos and Yel Haaretz Shabbos Lashem Sod Chaloi Sizra V'Charma Chaloi Sizmar." So the question of the Gemara is that the pasuk is very repetitive, and then it continues. So first it said everything about grain, and then it repeats it about grapes. Why does it have to say it 2 different times? It should be included in each other. So explains the Gemara, 5 lines from the tabla. Meimra, this means to say, the Torah is teaching us on these subcategories. Picking the grapes, that's biblically forbidden, but other toldos are not biblically forbidden, and therefore the Gemara answers, that you're going to be allowed to water the field. Why? Because Shemitah is daraisa, but only the avos. The toldos watering is not, and therefore the watering is going to be permitted on Shemitah. Ask the Gemara, and as everyone realized, this is quite a fundamental answer. What is forbidden on Shemitah? The Gemara now is saying only the primary avos malachis are aser. Ask the Gemara. V'loi, is what you're saying accurate 6 lines from the top? V'atani, we learned in a brayso, the pasuk teaches us you should not plow. You should not plant in the field, and you should not pick the grape, prune the vineyard, as we just saw in the pasuk. This pasuk teaches us explicitly zerua, planting, v'zimur, and pruning. Where do we know all other malachis? Where do we know weeding? Where do we know idur? Where do we know shoveling? Where do we know chisuach? Where do we know weeding by cutting? 2 different types of weeding. For the fact that the pasuk wrote in the way that it did, it implies not all. That you're not allowed to do any malacha, loy kol malacha. The fact that the Torah says sadcha loy, charmecha loy. So what does that teach us? You can't do any malacha. V'loy kol malacha shebekarmecha, and you can't do any malacha in the vineyard. So minayin, and the brayso continues, shein mekarsimin ve'mezardin ve'mefaskin ve'ilan. How do you know you're not allowed to mekarsimin is cut off the dry branches of the trees. Me zardin is cut off the extra branches. Mifaskin is to support the tree. Tamaloymar sadchaloi charmachaloi. Again, lo kom malacha shebezadchav, lo kom malacha shebekarmach. You're not allowed to do anything in the field or anything on the vineyards. Again, this is going to now we're going to have it a third time. Menayin shein mezavlin, you're not allowed to fertilize. Vein mefarkin. And you're not allowed to remove the stones of Vein Ma'avkin, and you're not allowed to put dust over the roots to keep it moist. Vein Ma'ashnin, and you can't fumigate the trees, get rid of all the moths. Milan. Tamalaymer again. Salad Chaloi, Charm Chaloi. Excuse me. Tamalaymer Sadchaloi, Charm Chaloi. Kol Melacha Shebezadchaloi, V'chol Melacha Shebekarm Chaloi. So we see very explicitly that it's not only the Avos, asks the Gemara. Now the brayso continues. Yochel, I would have thought Yikashkish Tachas Azitim. Wait, maybe you're not allowed to dig under the olive tree. Well, you add there a different type of digging tachas like a funim under the vineyard. Well, you're not allowed to fill up the clefts with water. Well, yes, like fun. You cannot make these little ditches around the grapevine. Now the Torah says Zriya bechlal. So we already knew Zriya planting. So why did the Torah explicitly speak it out? To equate to Zriya. So again, Zriya is something that applies equally both to the sada and to the karim and to the vineyard. So therefore, says the Gemara, you're telling me that only the avos are forbidden, not the toldais. We just had this whole lengthy brisa, which clearly teaches us, not like you just said, clearly teaches us that there are derabbanans, clearly teaches us that the toldais are forbidden are forbidden as well. So how can you suggest that why are you allowed to water the field? You know you're allowed to water the field because it's a tolda, and toldais are muta and shmita. We see clearly not that way. Answers the Gemara. Answers the Gemara. Midrabanan. The Kra Asmachta Ba'alma. Answers the Gemara with the whole brayso over here that taught us everything here that was forbidden. That's all it did in the Rabbanan. And the pasuk, it seemed kept telling me Sad Chaloi, Karm Chaloi, which seemingly dictated should be a din daraisa. No, it's an asmachta, it's an illusion in the Torah. But now the brayso continues. The Keshkosh B'Shvias Mishari, 1 second, is digging under the tree really aloud. The pasuk says in the 7th year you have to leave the fields and you have to forsake the land. Tishmitena milikashkoish, and the brayso explains what's tishmitena? No digging under the trees. Vinitashta, what's vinitashta? Milisakel, you can't clean out the racks. So we see that you're not allowed to dig under the olive tree, and the previous brayso said you're allowed to. There's 2 different types of digging under the olive trees. One of them is getting rid of the excess dirt around the tree, and one of them is covering over the cracks of the roots. So the Gemara explains that the Gemara explains Elon, when it comes to digging up the ground around the tree, that's forbidden also. Stume pili, but it comes to covering over the racks, Shari, that is going to be mutter. So again, one of the bit of complications, as we're going to see as we go further and further into this Masechta, is all these different agricultural processes that we don't necessarily relate to, all the different hoeing and pruning and clearing and fumigating, etc., which is definitely true. Apologies. Which is definitely true. However, what's the idea? We always have to look into the side. We have to understand what the Gemara is teaching us. Says the Gemara very, very clearly. The question was, you told me only avos are forbidden, not toldais. We have a whole brisa listing all the toldais. After everything, what does the Gemara answer? It's important to get this answer clear because this is going to be repeated in 1 minute in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, you know what? It's an Issa Dirabanan, but the pasuk's only an Asmachta. And asks the Gemara, and therefore we're keeping the answer that we said, that at some level it's going to be allowed to water the fields. Why? Because the watering was not included in the aforementioned brisa. Itmar, says the Gemara, ha'chayrish b'shvi is someone who plows during Shemitah. Rabbi Yechon, Rav Elazar, Chadam Reloikev, Chadam Reino Loikev. Is there malchus for plowing during Shemitah? Suggests the Gemara, Lema, let's say this machlekes, whether you get malchus for plowing is a machlekes, whether they hold of the opinion of Rav Avin Amar Rav Eloi. Who says what? Amar Rav Avin Amar Rav Eloi. Kol magush nemar klal basei. The Torah writes a general positive rule, uprat b'loi sasei, and it's specific in the negative commandment. Ein done in oisei v'klal uprat klal. Do not learn klal u'prat klal, which would include everything. Rather, says Rav Avinam Rav Eloi, all you're going to learn is that which is explicit. So man da'amar loike, let's say Rav Avinam Rav Eloi. So the one that says that you get malchus, even though the Torah did not explicitly write plowing by Shemitah, he does not hold of Rav Avinam Rav Eloi. He rather holds that it's a regular klal u'prat klal, and it includes everything, including plowing. Man da'amar einoi loike is like Rav Avin, and the one that says you do get malchus. Why? Because he holds like Rav Avin. The one that says you do not get malchus is why? Because he holds like Rav Avin, and therefore there's no malchus because plowing is not explicit. Answers the Gemara like the Kuli Amal last like Rav Avin, like no one holds a Rav Avin. Mandamer like a Shapir. That makes a lot of sense. Why do you get malchus? Because klal u'prat klal includes everything. Anything similar to the klal. The prat mandamer einay like amelacha mechli zemira bechlal zeria ubetzira bechlal ktsira. Hopefully, it should sound very familiar. When it comes to pruning, it's like it should be included in planting, and betzira picking should be included in ksira harvesting. So why did the Torah speak it out? Lemeimar, to teach you. Tahani told us who the mechayev. I told the achrina loy mechayev. Says the Gemara, the fact that the Torah spoke of these cases teaches us only those cases are forbidden derabanan, but other cases are not forbidden derabanan, and therefore says the Gemara, charisha, you will not get malchus for, according to that man Amar. And now ask the Gemara the same again. This is obviously repetitive to what we just had a moment ago. The exact same shaklavataria. A moment ago, the Gemara suggested that maybe only that which is forbidden is that which is explicit. And that, what did the Gemara ask back? V'loi, and we're going to see right here, 2 lines into the wide lines. Is that true that only that which is explicit is forbidden? V'atani yasad chaloy sizra v'char mechaloy sizmar. Ein li'ela zeiruah v'zimar. All we know from the Torah is a ruah planting, the zimra and pruning. How do you know? When it comes to hoeing, when it comes to covering over the branches, etc. You're not allowed to do anything in the field or in the vineyards. And how do you know? Similarly, you're not allowed to trim the tree and cut off the dry branches. You can't fertilize him. and you can't remove the stones, and you can't fumigate, get rid of all the moths, be alone in the tree. I would think, maybe you also not let it dig under the olive trees and under the vineyards. You can't fill up the cracks with water. You can't dig around the vineyards. So now it's coming to exclude. So why did it exclude to teach you 2 lines to the bottom? Zuriya planting is equatable, is similar, both by the fields and the vineyards. So ask the Gemara, what are you talking about? We see very, very clear that anything that's in a field and in a vineyard, which of course should include charisha, is forbidden. So why are you telling me it's not? Answers the Gemara, you're right. Midrabanan, Vikra asmachta balmu, but the pasuk is only an asmachta. And therefore, it doesn't mean it's going to be mutter to plow. It means there'll be no malchus if you plow. There's no malchus if you plow, as there's no explicit mention of it in the Torah. It's only an asmachta and illusion. Says the Gemara as we turn over to Gimel and Beis, Ki Asar Avdimi Amar Yachal Yilkal Teisefes. I would have thought you get Malchus for Teisefes, something additional. But we learn a limud that it's Potter. So again, a cryptic statement of Ravdimi. I would have thought you get Malchus for a Teisefes, an addition. Says the Gemara, no. Ravdimi did not remember my Talmud, my Teisefes. He didn't remember what exactly was this din. He just remembered some sort of din. We would have thought you can't do this, but you could. What's going on over here? My Teisefes. Rav Elazar Amar Charisha. Says Rav Elazar, you know this is referring to plowing. Charisha is the Teisefes. Is the additional halacha that I would have thought you get Malchus. But then the Gemara said, no, Charisha, I would have thought you get Malchus for plowing. To Asya Miklalu Bradu Klal, because it's included in the Klal Pradu Klal. But the Gemara then teaches us, no, you do not get Malchus. Why? Why else would the Torah speak out everything else and not speak out Charisha? Clearly to teach us that there's no Malchus for Charisha. So Torah number 1, Rav Elazar, is we're talking about Charisha, and that's why there is no Malchus. Rav Yochanan Amar, no, the Brisa of Rav Dimi on the top line is referring to something else. It's referring to the days that we added on, a concept that we learned in previous Masechtais, that it's not only starting with Rosh Hashanah that Shemitah takes effect. Even before Rosh Hashanah, certain practices you cannot do. You think you'd have to get Malchus for Teisefes, for the additional halacha, you have to leave over items and not working them before Rosh Hashanah to Asiyami B'Charshu V'Katzer Tishbais. Because we learn now from the fact that the Torah says, do not plow and reap, and you have to rest from Mevanos, L'Talmud, L'Ptura. But the Gemara teaches us not that way. As we're going to see in a moment. Says the Gemara, let's go a bit deeper into the second answer of Rav Yochanan, that the Brisa of Rav Dimi is referring to the time before Rosh Hashanah. Ma Yom Shel Bnei Rosh Hashanah. Ask the Gemara, what exactly are you referring to? K'nitanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, on Mosai Charshim Besada Ilan Erev Shviyes. Until when you let it plow? Before Shemitah, before Rosh Hashanah. Beishami Yamim calls man Shiav Lepri, you let it plow. As long as it's beneficial for the fruit that's currently in the field, and you're not doing something to benefit the land, you're doing it for the fruit that is there. The two opinions are not very, very far apart. Rather, because Rabbi Shammai as well, when he says whatever is good for the fruit, is also close to Shavuos. And that's by fruits. But how long you let it plow in a grain field? Erev Shvius. When the moisture dries up and is no longer there. And as long as people are plowing to plant squash and gourd. The Torah is giving every person his own subjective time, the own time when He has to stop plowing. Why? Because different people plow for different times for the squash and for the gourd. Ella says Rav Shimon, Bisada Lavan Ara Pesach, Bisada Ilan Ara Teres. Grains until Pesach, trees until Shavuos. And on this, Bryce of Amr Rav Shimon, Bazi Amr Rav Yeshua, about 20 lines down. First one line is Yeshua. Ben Levi Misham Bar Kapara Rav Gamliel Bezdina Nimnu Al Shnei Paragam Halalu. Rav Gamliel and his Bezdin got up and said, Ubatzlan these two time periods, the time period that you have to stop on Pesach, time period you have to stop on Shavuos, done, null and void, says Rav Gamliel and his Bezdin, and you're allowed to plow, excuse me, all the way to Rosh Hashanah. Says the Gemara, holding in on this last detail of the Brisa, Amrli Rav Zir Ravua, Amrli Rish Lakish Rav Yechanan, Rav Gamliel Bezdino Hechi Matzi Mevali Takanta Beisham Bezilla. What? This is the Takana Beisham Bezilla. Rav Gamliel is coming along and saying, that's it, finished. You're allowed to go all the way to Rosh Hashanah. How can he do that? Why not? V'atanan, we learned in a Mishnah famous rule. Ein Bezdin Yachal Levatloi Divrei Bezdin Chaveiroi. One Bezdin cannot nullify what another Bezdin does. Elim King Gadim Hanabachachma Binyan. Unless it's greater than the first Bezdin, and of course, no one's going to be greater than the Bezdin of Beishami Beis Hillel. So how could Rav Gamliel get rid of the decree, get rid of the Takana of Beishami Beis Hillel to stop plowing on Pesach and Shavuos? Ishtaimim Kichshach Adam. So Rav Yochanan paused for a moment, and Amar Lei, and then he responded and said, Emer Kach, say as follows. Hisnu beineim, Beishamei and Beis Hillel, when they made the original takana to stop plowing, to stop doing work in the field, the grain field, the tree field, before Rosh Hashanah, Pesach, and Shavuos, respectively, Beishamei and Beis Hillel built into that halacha. If someone wants, if another peasant wants to nullify this halacha, they're allowed to nullify it. Says the Gemara. 1 second. The whole previous discussion sounded like who was the one that made the whole takana, the whole decree that you're not allowed to work before Rosh Hashanah. Sounds like it was Beisham Beis Hillel, Rosh Shavuos, and Pesach. Asks the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom. Did Hui? What? This was a takana of Beisham Beis Hillel. This is straight from Moses as Mount Sinai. There were 3 halachas that Moshe received in this regard. The halacha that once we have 10 saplings, it's a certain level of a field, and you're allowed to work on it. The halachas about Rava and Yisachamayim. And these halachas are which we learn out from that you're not allowed to plow before Rosh Hashanah. So why are you suggesting it was Beishami Beis Hillel? It really was Lach Moshe Misinai. Amar Rav Yisrael Kigemer Elchas Shlishim Yom L'nei Rosh Hashanah. Really, that Lach Moshe Misinai was 30 days. V'asarani Tikon Mi Pesach U'Me'ateres Beishami Beis Hillel said not just 30 days, got to go back Pesach and Shavuos. V'asa B'diu, and then Rav Gamliel came along and said, excuse me, and they made a condition within their original decree Beishami Beis Hillel. Klarat Levatel Yavel Levatel. And that is where Rav Gamliel had the place to come along and be mevatel that decree. And now, the Gemara is going to go all the way back. What's the discussion that we're having? The discussion that we're having is about Charisha, about the plowing right before Shemitah. Now, the Gemara is going to wonder, really, is that really Hani Al-Chasaninu? Cry Ninu! It's not a Lach L'Moshe Misinai. Really, it's a Pasik. As the Mishnah quotes, Becharish v'Katzer Tishbais of Kiva Amir Ein Tzarech Leimer Charish v'Katzer Shal Shvius Shreik Var Namar Sot Chalei Siz V'Cham Chalei Sizmar. So why did the Torah speak it out? Al Charish Shal Erev Shvius Shenichnas, and we turn over to tomorrow's Daf Talid. Lishvies, because Shal Shvies, Yatzal Moitzai Shvies. So you see clearly we're learning it out from the pasuk. Rabbi Shmuel Leimer says a different din. Machar Rishos, I've cut to Rishos. No, it's talking about things which are optional. Mitzvah, that's excluded. But ask the Gemara, what do we see very clearly? We see that the halacha that you're not allowed to plow before Rosh Hashanah 30 days is not the halacha l'Moshe Misinai, but rather what is it? It's learned out straight from the pasuk. Elo Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, and with this we will conclude. Ki Gemiri Elchasa Lemishre Yelada. When did the halacha l'Moshe Misinai come along to permit the Yelada, the young tree, the sapling? The case when we had 10 Eser Netiyos, 10 saplings in a Beisa. That's the halacha l'Moshe Misinai. But Kra, what do we need the pasuk for? Lemisar Zekina, in order to forbid the older trees. And of course, why can't you learn one for the next? And we'll leave that from tomorrow's Daf Mirza Shem.